Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Kristen Wiley, and I am a program officer at Templeton World Charity Foundation. I am so happy that you can be here today at the third webinar of our Open Science webinar series. Each month, we bring to you experts on all things open science. Next month, we have organized a webinar on how to share data. In October, we'll bring together experts for a discussion about the benefits of pre-registration for the researcher and the research. If you've missed the previous two webinars, you can find a recording on our website. The address is, I'm just changing my slide here. The address is on point 2 of the slide that you can see, or you can use that QR code to get to the web page. You'll also see a few polls pop up during this webinar. We'd be really happy if you could participate in them. The aim for this webinar is to dive a bit more into the sharing research articles. I'm thrilled to have two experts here today with us, Kristen Ratan and Joe McArthur. Kristen has a 20-year history working to accelerate advances in science and research communication. She is the founder of Strategies for Open Science, Stratos. Stratos is working towards a unified and cohesive open science moving forward by connecting ideas, people, projects, and infrastructure to craft unique solutions. Kristen will open this webinar with reasons for why sharing is good, including why it's good for your career, and we'll dive deeper into preprints. Welcome, Kristen. Joe McArthur studied pharmacology at UCL and then researched neuroscience at Eli Lilly and UCL. As a student, Joe co-founded OA.Works. OA.Works is a nonprofit which builds tools so that open access is easy and equitable. The tools are free, open source, and co-designed with advocates for a just world. One of these tools is geared towards sharing your research, ShareYourPaper. Joe will explain what ShareYourPaper does, why you should care, and how it works. After both Kristen and Joe have presented, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. Please add any questions to the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen. And just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website in a few days. And we would also appreciate any feedback that you have after it. So please fill out the survey that pops up or email us at open@templetonworldcharity.org. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to you, Kristen.
Great, thanks, Kristen. I just need to be given permission, or I think it says I can't share while you're sharing.
I just gotta unshare it. And great. I will do that right now. There we go.
Great. All right. And here we go. Thanks for having me. This is obviously a topic I'm very excited about as the founder of Strategies for Open Science. And welcome to everybody who's here. So I think most of us have read in the news or seen reports that COVID-19 has been a forcing function for open science. It's made it to the mainstream media, so it must be important. I've certainly never seen anything like the last couple of years in terms of the sharing of data sets, early findings, short reports, and it's all being done openly, nothing behind paywalls. So what's fascinating about this is there's a sort of, and in addition to that, most of the large publishers and society publishers have made any COVID-related papers that they publish open as well for the duration of the pandemic. So this is an admission that open is in fact better for science and that we'll have more rapid and better outcomes if information is shared openly. So what is open access? I'm sure that most of you know. I think the key to understanding open access is that it doesn't just mean information is free. It means that anyone can read it, can download it, copy it, distribute it, print, search for, and reuse it in educational materials or other places like that. So when the pandemic ends and publishers put those articles back behind their paywalls, we'll know the difference between something that was made free for a few minutes versus something that was really fully open access from the beginning. So the open access movement started actually in the late 1990s and sort of formalized in the early 2000s. So here we are almost 20 years in, and there's been quite a rise in open access. And I think one of the more interesting developments has been funders who are now mandating it. So a lot of funding organizations have joined Coalition S, which is a unified effort to mandate open access. But in addition, many funders outside of this group have open access policies. So funders are beginning to see the value of this and really pushing grantees in this direction. Interestingly, since we've had almost 20 years of data on open access, we can see some advantages to researchers to publishing open. One is that open access articles seem to be cited more often. So the more people have access to your work, the more likely they are to cite it. And there have been a number of studies on this over the years, but the balance has been an increase in citations. Also, interestingly, open access appears to be a leading indicator of greater collaboration among researchers. So countries that have invested in open access have over time seen an increase in the level of international collaboration among researchers. And since collaboration is another key element of what funders are focusing on today, I think this is interesting because this will have a sort of cyclical push towards more open access. More open access means more collaboration. More and more funders will begin to really push for fully open access granting programs. Open access didn't change one thing. It didn't change the fact that the journal article is still the primary form of credit that people use in funding applications, promotion, et cetera. But what has happened in the recent 5 years or so is people have been examining how credit is defined in a journal article and trying to shift it away from being just focused on the first author, for example, to really trying to get a more granular look at what people did to contribute to that article. And I think this is important because it sort of wrestles the primacy of credit away from just a journal article to more ways in which people collaborate to the scientific record. And you can see this played out here in this PLOS article in tiny, tiny font, I apologize, but you can see the contributor roles underneath the author names: visualization, writing, conceptualization, methodology, in addition to the typical investigation. So this is an interesting step, and people are beginning to use this kind of credit taxonomy to acknowledge people who aren't on the author list who have also contributed. And as we talk more about open science, we can talk a little bit about how this kind of broadening of credit can apply to work outside of the journal article. So as I mentioned, the journal article has remained the sort of key single thing that gets counted towards career advancement and funding opportunities in the past. But this too is beginning to shift. So one of the things that most of us noticed over the course of the pandemic was the sheer volume of preprints on COVID-19. And it was a rapid way for people to share information well before the multi-year cycle of publishing in a journal. We just didn't have that time. But preprints have been on the rise for a long time. For example, archive in the field of various fields of physics has been around for over 30 years, and physicists regularly share their work as a preprint prior to publication in a journal. This is beginning to broaden out towards life sciences, medicine, psychology, and other fields. Preprints are, you can put out a preprint anytime prior to publication. They are not peer reviewed, and that's well known and understood. And that also means that you can receive feedback and then update them. You can make corrections or add more information and have a new version of that available on a preprint server. So they're fluid in that way, which actually more closely reflects the way science is done. You know, you never have the final story. Preprints are a great way to tell the story as it progresses. They're compatible with journals. There are bidirectional links from a preprint to a journal that may be published, a journal article that may be published subsequently. And there are links from that article back to the preprints that preceded it. They are citable, so credit can be given. And interestingly, now more funders and others, institutions, are beginning to count preprints the way they've counted articles as evidence of excellence, productivity, et cetera. And preprints get all the same metrics that articles do. So you can imagine a whole set of metrics for success and for excellence and coming out of the preprint movement. What's interesting as we've been able to examine preprints versus articles is over time, journal articles have been taking longer to publish, and they've been getting longer in their length. And what this means is the longer in length part means more information has been crammed into journal articles over time, more figures, more data, more findings, et cetera, more supplemental information. And this has happened at the demand of the journals themselves. So these are three leading journals, Cell Nature and the Journal of Cell Biology, that were examined by Ron Vale in an article in PNAS. And this was supplied via the courtesy of the organization that he founded that advocates for preprints called ASAP Bio. What his findings show us is that the demand on authors has grown over time significantly in terms of what is the minimum publishable unit. And this means that we're literally waiting for researchers to have those extra experiments done, to have those panels completed, to have that additional information. And we're maybe waiting years. And this obviously means the work is not being shared typically. It's not even out there in a published behind the paywall form. It's just not even published. So this has been growing. And at the same time, the time to publication for articles submitted has also grown. So we have slower publication timelines, and we have longer papers. Preprints, on the other hand, are getting faster. So preprints have been around for some time, but they're getting even shorter and faster. So the time to publication is very rapid. It's literally less than 24 hours in most cases. And this analysis done on COVID papers show that COVID papers, preprints, have helped to reduce the overall word counts. So people, through the forcing function of a pandemic, have decided to share shorter and shorter pieces of information and findings, maybe just a data set with some context around it. And this has helped create the sort of rapid outcomes like vaccines that we were all looking for. Preprints also provide value to careers. So I've heard a lot of researchers say, well, if I share this as a preprint, will I get scooped? If I share this as a preprint, will it hurt my ability to publish in a journal? And it turns out the answer is definitely not. Almost all the journals out there, certainly in the life sciences and social sciences, have agreed to not penalize authors for having had a preprint in advance. And frequently, preprints actually receive quite a bit more attention. And the journal article associated with it also receives more attention, and that means more social media attention and mainstream media attention, blogging, news articles, and also more citations. So this is exciting. It means that that open is a path towards career success, and now we have some evidence to prove that. So in addition, I work a lot with funders, and more funders are beginning to actually ask for, count, and even mandate preprints. So some of the funders, such as the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Michael J. Fox Foundation, and a new funder that I work closely with, Aligning Science Against Parkinson's, have all mandated preprints already. Wellcome Trust in the UK is looking to begin requiring preprints in certain cases, like, for example, a pandemic or COVID or something along those lines. But more importantly, I think preprints are beginning to be counted in promotion applications within universities as well as grant applications. And this means that there's a shift from credit away from just that final journal article towards preprints. And many funders, like the large ones like NIH, are at least encouraging preprints. So we're seeing this momentum, and this has all really been happening just in the last 5 years. Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, which is the funding initiative that I mentioned that I work with, is only just over a year old and has already committed over $320 million to various different active programs it's funding in their area of basic science and Parkinson's. I was fortunate enough to work with them on their policies. And not only are they a Plan S or Coalition S member, so they have strong open access policies, but they are requiring a preprint at or before the time of journal article submission. What's even more interesting is they've expanded beyond just the preprint, and they're also asking for all data sets, code, protocols, resources to be shared at the time of that preprint. So researchers grantees are depositing data sets in data repositories or putting protocols in protocol services like Protocols.io, et cetera. And so what they're doing is opening up even another realm of ways to assign credit, which is, have you deposited your data and made that open? That's important to us in our granting applications. So we're broadening credit well beyond, with these sorts of initiatives, which are beginning to grow, we're broadening beyond the journal article and even beyond the preprint. One of the guiding principles for ASAP is collaboration. And the feeling is you must be open in order to truly collaborate. So open as a function of collaboration. Others are really interested in open as a function, for example, for reproducibility. And perhaps these things are related. So this shift in credit is already underway. And all of the outputs that people produce along the way with research, all of these things can be citable over time. And so you can now imagine at the moment of, say, for example, an early rapid communication like a preprint, that all of these other pieces get shared at the same time. They can all be cited, they can all be reused, they can all be viewed, downloaded, et cetera. People can work with them. So the ability to build on prior work just will really accelerate science. Okay, thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I think that the takeaway for me is that open makes for better science. And I appreciate your attention. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kristen. We don't have any questions in the question and answer section right now, but if anyone does have questions, please put them in there. There's going to be another opportunity for Kristen to answer them after Joe's presentation. So Joe, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you so much again, Kristen.
Thanks so much, both. As ever, a tough act to follow, Kristen. And thank you so much for the invitation. So I'm Joe McArthur, as you already know, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about how to share your paper, which is a bit of a play on words. So to cut right to the meat of it, I'm going to have a very, very practical talk. And talk mainly about our tool called ShareYourPaper, which you can find at ShareYourPaper.org, and use that as an example for how you can sort of make your paper open in general as well. But the crux of what I'm going to talk about is how ShareYourPaper makes doing that very, very easy. And in this GIF that you can see that we've got going here, the gist is that you can put in a DOI. We'll give you instructions for what versions to find in order to share your work legally. You can simply go and grab those, upload them to the site, and you're done. There's no logins, thousands of emails from us, or sort of lots of documents to read or things to have to figure out. I'm going to talk through this step by step as we go, but hopefully this is a sign of things to come. And the great thing about this method is that it's free. You can do it during the publication process or after, and you can still publish in your favorite journals. It's a little bit different to what we've just been speaking about with preprints, because the emphasis on this is on work that's been accepted into journals or that has already been published. But this doesn't necessarily speed the publication process, but it does make your research open to folks, which is still a big win in my books. So it's actually not 30 minutes, it's a little bit less than that, but we are still going to talk about what ShareYourPaper does, why you should care about it, how it works, and what you can do next. So here's a little bit about what ShareYourPaper does. It's a tool that helps with, in the lingo of open access, it's called self-archiving or green open access. But the way to think about this is self-archiving is a way that you can You can publish as you normally do in most journals, even behind the paywall, but make a free copy available elsewhere for folks who may not have access to read, use, and reuse, as the case may be. This is totally in line with publishing agreements and the law and things like that, but it can be a little bit tricky. The job of ShareYourPaper is to make it easy. And to a certain extent, to also help funders and libraries that may be supporting you in the research process to make it easy as well. So it plays those sort of dual roles. The most important question that I tend to think is worth answering is why should you care about doing this thing called self-archiving or green open access? Sometimes it's a little why should you get your head around these sorts of new topics and things like that? The first is, I think, that that if you walk through these steps at the other end, your research paper is free for folks to use and reuse, and that's a pretty big deal. One of the reasons for that is that it'll get you more citations, and quite a few more citations at that. There've been, as Kristen said, sort of, open access has been around long enough now where we've been able to study it pretty intensely in lots of different ways and with lots of different researchers in lots of different fields. And what you see again and again is that by making your work open, you can get significantly more citations. If you're more motivated by the morals than sort of what you can get out of it, I think often it's always nice to point to this being like the quote unquote right thing to do, where research affects patients or is publicly funded. There's sort of a bit of a moral imperative in many cases to do this. And I think it's, when I was getting into science, this was what I thought I was here to do, was to make my findings available to the world and not necessarily put them up behind paywalls. The other sort of less sort of joyous one is that lots of folks are doing it. About 50% of research every year is being published open access. It's actually now a little bit over that. But that means that lots of folks are getting those benefits. And one of the great things about ShareYourPaper and self-archiving is, in general, is sometimes there's a significant barrier to doing that because you need to pay an APC. With self-archiving, this is totally free for you to do. And that's, I think, one of the most important parts about this method. There's lots of ways to get to open access depending on your resources, your preferences, and your needs. This is one that provides you a route to doing it that is free of charge. I've already somewhat made this point, but we're here now. Reiterate, this is something that you can do for free, and it can be easy. Some tools make it easier than others, and obviously with ShareYourPaper, we're trying to make it easier for everyone. So let's talk a little bit about how self-archiving works and how ShareYourPaper helps you do it. So this will be a little bit of a familiar GIF, hopefully, at this point. Again, just walking through the process of doing self-archiving on the ShareYourPaper.org website. However, if we were to break down sort of what we're helping you out with in the background and the steps that you might take to self-archive somewhere else, there would be about 7 steps. These aren't like the official steps, but I think they're nice ways to sort of start to break them down. So the first is simply choosing what paper you'd like to try and self-archive. And then you've got to take on a pretty important step, which is checking how you can do that in accordance with your funder policies, the contract that you sign with the journal, and things like that. Requires you to look up just a little bit of information to make sure that you're doing this legally and sort of making sure that you're not gonna, that you're doing it safely. Then of course you've got to track down the file that you can share, choose a place to put it, and we'll talk more about that. Enter all the details to make your record, and get that approved and share it with your friends and colleagues. So let's walk through those step by step. So in choosing a paper, I've already mentioned this briefly, but it's worth mentioning again. You can self-archive a paper during the process of publishing, right on the day that it's published or 5 years after. This is a process where you can share at any moment, and even your sort of whole back catalog. It's pretty incredible in that. Of course, the sooner you share, the better. But you can do it sort of as soon as possible. At ShareYourPaper, doing this starts by, you can do this just by starting to enter a DOI of your paper into the tool, and we'll take it from there. Then the next critical step in the process is, as I said, sort of most journals allow and in fact encourage you to share your work. It's as good for them as it is for you. Journals like it when their work has impact. And so they've created paths by which you can make these works available. And it's just important that you sort of keep an eye on those while you go to do this. So there's a few things that some journals will suggest that you do. So for instance, they might need you to share a specific copy of your research. And often that will be not the final published version with logos and things like that. It'll be a version, the accepted version or things like that without some of the formatting. They'll sometimes need you to put a specific statement with the work that just lets people know that this is this might be the accepted manuscript and not the final published version. And make sure that you're crediting that final published version. It's very straightforward. You just got to sort of keep an eye on it. And then while you can start this process whenever, sometimes publishers will ask you to put a little bit of a delay between the final published version and when your free version goes live. Sometimes that's as little as 0 months, which is where it's going increasingly, but it can be as long as 12 months, and that's quite fairly common in sort of science and in general. So there's lots of again, this doesn't need to be as scary as it sounds. You can use tools like Sherpa Romeo if you're not using ShareYourPaper, but ShareYourPaper will automatically figure all of this out for you in the background. So you don't need to worry about any of this. Just follow the instructions on the screen, and we've got your back for this part of the process. Moving on, if the journal needs you to share the accepted version, you've got to go hunt that down. So you might want to go check through your email inbox. If you're better at managing your files than me, digging through your hard drive or Google Drive might be the place to go. Or one of the better places to get these versions is just from the submission system that you would have used to publish in the first place. They often archive those for safekeeping, but you can get them out and use them for this process. So that's one place that we recommend people to go to a lot. The thing to keep in mind is that this often isn't the final published version, but it's very common to share these types of versions and sort of, usually making small, removing comments or combining things back into one file is totally fine. So you can make it a little bit more presentable, but you do have to still keep a fairly big differentiation between the final published version and your accepted version. Again, we're here to guide you through this at ShareYourPaper.org. You've got these instructions here and some tips to get this right first time. But there's lots of guides for sort of helping with this online as well, including from us that I just haven't included here. So once you found that file, you want to sort of decide where to put it. When we're talking about self-archiving, most of the time we're talking about putting it into a repository. A repository is basically a special scientific site for scientific works that are really good at housing your paper in a sort of alongside its metadata and things like that. So there's a specialized site for doing that. They work really hard to preserve your paper, so they'll put copies in lots of different places so that even if that one site doesn't go down, your link is never breaks. And they work to make your paper discoverable. So make sure that it's indexed by all the services that you might expect and turns up in Google Scholar or Web of Science or your library's discovery system. They work really hard to make sure that all of those things are done on your behalf without you having to worry too much. Repositories are also really powerful because they're often owned by your academic institution or run by your discipline. Or there are other nonprofits in the space who produce these repositories. And I believe sort of last time in this series, you were spoken to by the Open Science Foundation, which builds the Center for Open Science. That's the other way around. The Center for Open Science, which builds the Open Science framework. That is a repository that you can self-archive your work in. Another particularly big example, actually, of an institution repository is in some sense PMC as well, which is the IR for the NIH, but at a very broad scale. So for ShareYourPaper, we will deposit your file into Zenodo, which is just a sort of general purpose subject repository that's used by a lot of different institutions, and yeah, sort of a very good one. It's CERN's backed by CERN and well funded by the EU and folks like that. Then you've got to create your record. So it's really important that your work gets accompanied by, the title of the work, who authored it, the metadata, and things like that, to make sure it's easy to find and folks know what they're looking at when they get it. And this is the place where you need those special statements that sometimes publishers will ask you to put together. So if you're not doing this with ShareYourPaper, you'll often need an account with that provider. If you're at an institution, you may need to get approved or speak to the library for one of these. Then you can walk through just sort of entering your paper's metadata. This is often, sometimes a little bit tedious, but again, if you not difficult. So you just want to make sure that wherever you can, you're inserting things like ORCIDs, those statements the publishers require you to put in place, and making sure to get the title of the paper and things like that right as you go. With ShareYourPaper, we'll just do this all in the background for you again. Probably you're getting a theme by this point. We're trying to do a lot of these steps on your behalf, but we'll use open data about your paper to fill up this record and make sure that it meets, to make sure that it's in good shape without, again, you having to worry about it. So the almost final step is, depending on where which repository you're using, they will sometimes approve your work. And this is basically to sort of have your back in the process and to make sure that your record has all the information you might need, that you're in line with publisher policies and things like that. And this is a really useful thing that many repositories will do, just to make sure that your record is in good shape before it gets put into the scholarly record forever. It's not sort of a formal peer review process or anything like that. It's just some checks to make sure that it's in good shape. Again, following this theme, ShareYourPaper does a lot of this instantly in the background, and we'll let you know if you sort of got the wrong version of your file or things like that. So the approval process can take, in other places, anywhere from a few minutes to a few weeks. And depending on how busy the folks on the other end of that form are, we'll do it for you in just a few seconds, and let you know what you need to do right there and then. Finally, when this is all over, you'll get a link to share your work, and if you give it a few weeks, that version will be ingested into all the different systems that it's needed to turn up in Google Scholar, Web of Science, your repository, and things like that. And then you're on your route to all of those benefits that Kristen and I have been talking about. And as we say at that point, it's a great moment to sort of do another and sort of work through the back catalog as you go. So again, this is something that we'll do for you. I think this is not shocking at this point, but it's certainly a good feeling. So that is everything I can tell you in a pretty short amount of time about how to share your paper. If you want to find out more and try it yourself, you can go to shareyourpaper.org. hopefully fairly easy to remember URL by this point in the talk. Otherwise, happy to answer questions now, of course. And if you have any that come to your mind after the talk, my email is on screen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. We've also just launched a poll. If you would like to learn more about self-archiving, you can just add it there. And I think after this poll is done, I also want to share the results of the poll that we did about whether or not how you feel about if your funder made preprints mandatory. So we'll give this one a few seconds. And if you have any questions, this will also be a period. You can also raise your hands and we can unmute you, and you can also ask your question out loud. But I have a few questions, which I think have come through, that I will start while we're doing this poll as well, so not to waste time. Kristen, I think this one is probably best for you. What has the growth of preprints been like? What have we seen the growth there?
It's been really interesting. As I mentioned, in physics, preprints have been around for 30 years, and Archive is the primary preprint repository, and it has grown extraordinarily to the point that it's sort of falling over with its own growth. And that really set a precedent. But in the life sciences and a lot of the social sciences, preprints were not part of common practice until probably recently. So bioRxiv, actually, I have a graph on this I can share real fast. bioRxiv is the primary repository for preprints. And you can see from this graph that since it launched in 2014, it's grown extraordinarily. Another piece of information I think is interesting in this graph is the amount of revised posts. So people are changing the way that they think of publishing by saying, oh, I've put a post up, but wait, I can change it. And to me, again, as I mentioned earlier, that really reflects more of the true nature of science, which is an evolving story that you have new information to add to. And we've sort of been taught that the final journal article has to reflect that. And that's created a lot of the delays and a lot of kind of the papers getting longer and longer, as I mentioned. So I think this graph is a good example of how this is shifting and over time.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's evidence in itself. So how is self-archiving different from preprints?
Me?
Either one. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so the simple answer is that preprints has a strong emphasis on doing it before publication. And with a journal, with self-archiving, the emphasis is on at the point of acceptance or right after you've published. Both share the goal of making work free and open. Preprints are better at making it fast, is how I would distinguish the two, but they're complementary strategies. You can preprint your work, and then at the moment it's accepted, self-archive your work, you could publish it in an open access journal as well. All of those benefits would probably compound in a number of different ways, but they're all sort of cumulative, I would say, and definitely complementary. If you don't get a chance to preprint your paper, there's no reason you can't self-archive it. If you can self-archive your paper, there's no reason you can't preprint it. In the open access lingo, we sort of consider these part of the same like high-level route. But for I think outside of that, the distinction is sort of pre and post publication.
Yeah, I would add to echo what Joe's saying. I think one of the they should both be happening. I mean, why not? Let's get the work out through as many channels as possible. It's only going to benefit the researchers who are publishing the work as well as those who need that information. So it's good for everybody. And the journals have stepped aside and said, we're not going to mess with these processes. We're okay with it, which is great because it means it doesn't impact your ability to publish wherever you want. The advantage of preprints is it's earlier, as Joe said, that it can be revised. You can get feedback. There are all sorts of preprint reviewing initiatives underway now. And so people are getting valuable input before they go into peer review, which allows them to have a better chance at peer review. So I'm waiting for the study that looks at if pre-printed articles move faster through peer review because they've had that initial feedback, but it's too early probably for that because the reviewing of preprints is a fairly recent development, but it's super exciting. And so I think then once you've published, once you're ready for that final article, the idea of sharing it through ShareYourPaper is great because it's just another vehicle to get it out there, regardless of the status of the journal article, open access or not.
Yep.
I think obviously we'd all love to see it be open access, but ShareYourPaper means at least it's available to people who need it.
Yep. Yep.
So all above.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and Virginia just shared the results of the poll of funders making, how the people on the webinar think that funders making preprints requirements. Kristen, is this expected? The sort of 69% yes, 15% no, is it kind of representative of feelings out there?
I think it is representative of recent shifts in these feelings, like in the last few years. And it's really exciting to see this because I used to be the publisher at PLOS, Public Library of Science, and we did a similar survey of our authors, probably 2012, 2013. And there was quite a bit of resistance to preprints as being part of their workflow, like as in when you submit an article to a PLOS journal, are you okay if we automatically preprint it and make it available? And there was a lot of resistance. And that seems like a fairly low risk behavior because the article's already been submitted. So it's not going to change the course of the article if it's preprinted. And there was a lot of resistance. So this represents, I think, a really very positive, very exciting shift towards accepting preprints as not risky, but an actually a valuable way to share the science and get that early credit going.
Pretty exciting. There's also a question, I think this might be for you, Kristen. Can you repeat the name of the site to upload protocols? And there's also another one of where to upload preprints.
Absolutely. So for protocols, there are a number of sites. I think Bioprotocols is one. Protocols.io, so it's protocols.io, is a site that's really great. I think they've done an excellent job, not just in allowing you to share your protocol, but in making that a citable object and that you can receive feedback on. So it's acknowledging that the protocol is, again, a moving and evolving item, but that at any point along the way, you can share it as a citable object. So we are recommending, as part of Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, the work I'm doing there, we are recommending people use protocols.io. And those items are actually being counted as part of the research process by the funder. Oh, and for preprints, there are a number of preprint servers. So there are field-specific ones, like PsychArchive for psychology, for example. By far the largest in the larger kind of life sciences realm is bioRxiv. Archive for physics papers, and then there's medRxiv, which is the sister preprint service to bioRxiv for more medical things. And bioRxiv and medRxiv have a brief kind of sanity check that they do on preprints before they post them, just to make sure that this isn't something that's completely out of range for rational science. And I appreciate that check that they do, because it means that just, completely insane things are not being shared.
Okay, we have 2 raised hands. Allison, you should be unmuted now, so you should be able to.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Well, I thought really the point of Kristen that you made of pointing out that science really is becoming more of an open discourse and discussion again, or not again, but really is becoming that whole spirit, or is coming closer to that spirit, is exciting. Are there any pathologies that you see arising with these novel open access methods? And if so, is there anything we can do maybe to uphold good, positive, fruitful debate, either culturally or even by building certain technologies into the platforms and technologies that we're striving to?
It's a great question. And I think that, in the earlier days of open access, the fear was that anything could get published. You're paying somebody and you're getting this work published, so how good could it possibly be? And I think we've seen with the sort of born open access publishers like Biomed Central and PLOS and eLife, that very high quality content. Open access does not change the quality. It's just it's a business model. It's how the cost of publishing gets covered. Does it get covered up front and then everybody can read it? Or does that cost get covered through subscriptions, which withholds access to people? And so some of the things that people feared have not happened. Low quality journal articles can come in any sort of journal, regardless of that access model. And peer review is imperfect. I think we can all acknowledge that it doesn't catch everything. But I do think there have been attempts to sort of game the whole open access system. There have been some journals that have arisen that are trying to just collect APCs, for example, and that has been quickly sort of squelched and acknowledged, and people have a list now of those journals. So you can know that's not a journal that is a legitimate journal. Again, things like this happen in the subscription world too. So this is not new, that kind of behavior. I think that when you talk about preprints, there is also the fear that something that hasn't been peer reviewed is potentially even dangerous to society. What if somebody put something out there and it got picked up by doctors, for example, and it turned out to be inaccurate, hadn't been adequately validated? I think one of the exciting things over the pandemic, which of course is not a positive thing, but during this we've learned a lot. And one of the things we've learned is that people are able to judge the value of the work without necessarily relying on peer review. They themselves are the peers, and they can do that analysis and review themselves. And so sort of forcing them to wait an additional year or two to be able to get access to that work is not necessarily going to help. That being said, mechanisms, as you asked about how to start to validate, have arisen. So for example, with preprints, it's that first sanity check that the bioRxiv or medRxiv does before it goes live to make sure it's not, something absurd. And then the wisdom of the crowd, which I think is far more valuable than the wisdom of just a couple of people, which is the way peer review operates. The wisdom of the crowd is much better. You can see how this work is being consumed and used. And now like how many page views has it has, how many citations has it has? Are people accessing it and using it? Are they mentioning it and citing it in new places? But also now with preprint reviewing happening, organizations like Pre-Review or Review Commons are providing actual reviewing services on preprints. So in a lot of ways, preprints will have a lot of the same qualities that journal articles have, just in a more fluid, evolving way that then leads up to that kind of final step of publication in a journal. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. And we also have Herman. Question? I will keep it open in case it's taking a while to see. Oh, it doesn't have a. I will move on. Oh, hi. Hello. I can hear you.
Glad you take my question. How does it differ from ResearchGate? I have quite a few papers posted on ResearchGate. Academia or two. I was on Academia also, but something went wrong. They had a duplicate account and I quit Academia, but I'm still on ResearchGate.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it's probably a me question. Great question. Yes, sorry to hear about the duplicate academia.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
Comment? I'm 86 years old and of course retired, but I'm still writing philosophy essays. My first two were published in a prestigious Springer journal, but now I'm publishing in a little journal out of China. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, so ResearchGate and academia.eu or .edu are examples of like academic social networks, like Facebook for science sort of things. The big difference between them and repositories is repositories are almost always owned by academic institutions and for example, scholarly societies, libraries, and are non-commercial. ResearchGate and academia.edu are normally owned by for-profit companies, or both of those are, and are sort of run essentially for-profit. What that means, for the difference is that they're not usually doing the sorts of checks to make sure that when you're putting work up onto that platform, it's preserved in the long term. A lot of those companies, if the day they go out of business, there might be, those links might break, and folks won't be able to get access to your work. They're often not checking that the version that you upload sort of complies with all of those policies, your funder policy, or the contract that you sign with the journal, and that puts you at a little bit of risk that you might not want in terms of getting that work taken down or things like that. And that sometimes gets those platforms into a little bit of bother as well, shall we say. I'll
throw one in, Joe, which is that to build on what you're saying, the journals themselves don't appreciate articles that they've published being then reshared through this other vehicle that is completely unconnected to their version of record. So ShareYourPaper offers a vehicle that is sanctioned and accepted by journals and is acknowledged by the institutions themselves as a valid way to share. Whereas ResearchGate, sometimes publishers force people to take down those articles, and that's not something you really want to have happen after you've shared it, if you can avoid it.
So the good news is that you can still get some of the benefits of using ResearchGate. It's obviously lots of scholars are there, and it's an important place to show your work often. But what you can do is put your work in a repository first and walk through some of those steps to make sure that you've got the right version and some of the sort of key details associated. And then you just put that in ResearchGate for folks to look at. And of course, that has benefits outside of just the work being there. But that's one way that I like to suggest that folks think about it. Repository first, and then you can put that version into ResearchGate, and you get around a lot of the problems. The extra benefit of that is that often these platforms actually aren't as sort of open and freely available to folks outside of academia as you might think, because you need those logins. Sometimes those logins go wrong, and that can be then difficult for folks to read and download the work from there. So repositories are generally, I think, a generally better fit, but there's a way to make them compatible with, having an up-to-date profile and ResearchGate.
I'm living in Oklahoma.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joe. There's another question. What if their paper does not have a DOI?
So DOIs are something that the publishing industry has created to ensure that once your paper is officially posted or published, it will always be findable. It can't go away. As Joe said, what if somebody goes out of business, the site goes down? A DOI is held, it's like a long-term link, a persistent identifier that always can locate that paper for you. So that's huge. So if you find a journal that doesn't offer DOIs, I would suggest looking for a different journal. Preprint services like BioArchive offer a DOI for that preprint version. And that means that it can't go away. It will always be citable. It will always be findable. So look for journals and preprint servers that offer a DOI. Protocols.io, for example, does that for your protocols. And that means that you have persistence and that this thing is archived just the way the best published works are.
With ShareYourPaper, at the moment you need to use that DOI in order for us to help you out with all of the things that we're doing for you behind the scenes. So that DOI gets linked to like the title of the paper and who authored it and things like that. So it means that we can go out and collect that information and put it into the records on your behalf. So at the moment, you do need a DOI to use ShareYourPaper, but most repositories won't need you to do that because they're happy for you to put that information in yourselves. So almost anywhere except ShareYourPaper, you can put in a paper, whether or not you have a DOI, is something we use because most people nowadays do get DOIs. And long term, we're looking to sort of give other routes for people. But that's sort of how it works there. And yeah, just, you know, again, agree with what Kristen says, and yeah.
One
but I know
way
that is an
to-
offer. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, Joe, that also one way to get a DOI if you have a paper that doesn't have one yet is to post it on Zenodo. And that is a site that offers a DOI for your data sets, for software you've written, for a paper or even a figure that you have that you want to share. It's a great repository. It's run by CERN, so we know it's not going anywhere. It's fully nonprofit. They take no ownership over your work. You get to decide the license. So anything you have that you want to share, you can go to Zenodo and do that, including a paper. And that way you'll have that DOI forever, even if the journal didn't give you one.
Yep. And that's why we use Zenodo for papers that we deposit. Yep.
And we at the funder that I'm working with, Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, also uses Zenodo and has a Zenodo community area specifically for those grantees. And it's been great because it's a quick and easy way for people to share data well before they even put a preprint out there if they're interested in getting feedback on it.
Great, thank you. Any other last few, there's no more questions. So if you have anything else you want to add before we close out, Kristen and Joe?
I just appreciate everyone's attention, and there's a lot to be learned in the world of open access, preprints, and open science. And so this is wonderful that Templeton is doing this exploration.
Great.
Couldn't say it better myself.
Thank you both. It's been truly a pleasure to join you today on this webinar. And I've just shared my screen again. I think that you guys can see it, just saying thank you. And also there's QR codes on the screen. You see it, right? Kristen and Joe, okay. So the next event in our series will be on September 9th, and we'll be turning our attention to another output, which is sharing research data. The link to this is the QR code on the left-hand side there. And again, I would appreciate any feedback on this webinar, and also let us know if there's any other topics which you would really like to hear about in any of the future webinars. We are, I heard protocols.io was mentioned by Kristen as well, and I think that's in our December webinar, I believe. I will itch, but keep your eyes out on these emails. That would be one of them. And just thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Kristen and Joe.